Hey guys, how you doing? It's Steve Karma. It is Coronagate day 79 or something like that. And Coronagate is basically our morning vlogs. But because of everything that was going on within the media, what I decided to do is to bring in some guests, and we were going to talk about what everybody else is talking about. Now, I do think sometimes when churches talk about being relevant, what they mean is they serve percolated coffee and there's some guy on a guitar. But I actually think that we are dealing with issues that are current and are relevant, and that Christians and the Bible and society need to be talking about. So I'm going to introduce them one by one, but I'm also going to allow them to tell their story. So the first guy I want to introduce is Jeff Haskins. Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is Jeff. As Steve has said, I'm currently the pastor of a church in Lancaster, Grace Baptist Church. I'm married. I've got 2 children. And I came to this country exactly 18 years ago. So I've been in this country 18 years now. I'm from South Africa. I grew up on what is known as the Cape Flats. I lived during the era that is known as apartheid. So that is my background, yeah.
And just because there are some people who are watching, and I see some of them, Matt Parker and Neve, who are a lot younger than me and you. I mean, I grew up remembering, songs like "Free Nelson Mandela." I was going to sing it. I read "Long Walk to Freedom." What is and what was the apartheid?
Well, it's basically the fact that if you're non-white, you live in a certain area and you stay in that area, and you have some privileges that white people have, you do not have. And it's pretty much a very restricted way of living. Yeah.
Yeah, based on the color of your skin.
Based on the color of your skin. Now, when we talk, the reason I'm saying non-white is because in South Africa, there's different groups. So some groups will be known as black, some will be known as colored, which is me, some are Indian. So if you're non-white, you are pretty much restricted. And you have certain, you don't have some of the privileges. Schooling was some of the privileges that you didn't have. You could go to school, but your schooling was much harder. Things like that. Where you lived was much rougher, not nice areas. So things like that.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a little moment. Jeff supports Liverpool, and we just, to make sure that we are dealing with all prejudices, we decided we were going to bring in Jonny Lee, who is not only white working class or from a white working class background, but Jonny is a Blue Nose and Everton fan. So we need to make sure that these guys don't fall out and fight. Stick in the comment section below if you're a Blue Nose or a Red Nose. But Jonny, what do you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, firstly, as I said before, Jeff's prayers are obviously stronger than my prayers, because the season's going to start again and Liverpool probably win that title. But yeah, my name's Jonny. I grew up all over the northwest of England. A child of the 70s and 80s. I know I don't look as old as that, but yeah, I am that old. I trained as a English and PE teacher, and got my first teaching job in central Birmingham, and really loved working in the inner city community in the end of the 90s. And then after God did some radical work in my life, I committed my life to Jesus and ended up leaving teaching and becoming a youth pastor in the middle of Birmingham. And I led well over a decade, one of the largest black majority youth ministries in the heart of the city. And it was just a privilege to do that. And then around 6 years ago, I took on a position here at Renewal in Solihul. And then just over 18 months ago, I transitioned into the senior lead of the church. And it's just an honor to lead a church that is so dynamic, represents many different kinds of people, and has a great impact in the heart of the nation.
Yeah, we've got some comments. I've already started the fighting. We've got Melissa saying, "Poor Jonny." Matt Parker, who is a Leeds fan, can you believe it? Leeds, who is Leeds? But not blue or red, but Parker loves Klopp and he wants Liverpool to win the league. I'm an old Celtic fan. And Celtic have a connection with Liverpool and United, but mainly Liverpool. So I said it here. Please don't send me hate mail. If you do, please send it to trendyhendy@hotmail.co.uk. But I kind of want Liverpool to win the league as well. And Melissa was born in Liverpool but lived in Everton. I know, Johnny. I'm sorry. I'm not a hater. I'm just saying you'll never walk alone.
It's unique to find somebody who supports Liverpool who's born in Liverpool. I mean, that's a unique position.
If you were born in Liverpool and you support Liverpool,
no, don't start
that. We have also got the hip hop lyricist Giuseppe or Connor, and I might be referring to him as each because sometimes I forget. But Giuseppe, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us about where you live, your background, and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Connor, Giuseppe, whichever one you want to call me. I'm from Sheffield, 28 years old. I'm mixed race. My mum's born in Grenada in the Caribbean. She came over here when she was about 5 years old. My dad's white Englishman, born in Norwich. Yeah, I currently work as a behaviour manager in a secondary school in Sheffield, probably the most ethnically diverse secondary school as well. So I do a lot of like one-to-one kind of intervention work, a lot of mentoring, smaller group sessions and stuff, a lot of the behaviour side of stuff. Before that, I worked at a charity called Gold Digger Trust in Sheffield that supports young people with low self-esteem. So I was one of the boys project coordinators for the city. So we used to do projects all around different areas of the city, some more deprived areas, run football projects, did courses, again, a lot of one-to-one mentoring and stuff like that. Worked in other schools before that as teaching assistant, cover supervisors, but I've always been involved in youth work through my church, which is Healy Church of Nazarene. I kind of didn't want to leave the youth club, and I was like, oh, is there anything for me to do? They gave me a position as a junior leader. And so I've been doing that for a few years. And yeah, I mean, in terms of upbringing an area, I'm quite lucky. I lived in what I consider a pretty good area in Sheffield. I had a mixture of different friends from different backgrounds. I've had my share of racism. I've also had some really good friends who are very open and wouldn't discriminate me for the colour of my skin. My mum's side, I think they were some of the first black people to be in their school when they first came over to the UK, which was also my school and then my secondary school after that. So yeah, it's just a very mixed. It's a boiling pot of just different culture, different experiences, and mixing with people from a lot of different backgrounds as well.
And we'll pick that up in a little moment. We have started a football war. John Townley, like under Jesus Christ, John Townley is my boss, and he's wearing a Leeds United shirt. So I now know two people who support Leeds United. And I better not start the Lancashire-Yorkshire thing, because obviously Giuseppe is from Yorkshire and I'm from Lancashire, and so is Jeff. So we outnumber him 2-1. But anyway, I better stop there. A little bit about myself. I'm a British-born Asian. Mum and dad are both Punjabi. Mum's family came over here in the 60s or 70s. My dad's family came over a lot earlier. I think it was just after the Second World War they came over. So kind of grown up, born in England, moved to Scotland when I was 6 years old. Scotland, at least when I was there, was and the area I was in, Kilmarnock, about 40 minutes away from Glasgow, was predominantly all white. The only Asians owned takeaways and restaurants and corner shops. I'm not being stereotypical. That's the way it was. Like I remember being at school and there was a Nigerian girl in our year, and people were like, are you guys related? And I'm like, what is wrong with people? And feeling pretty much, not connected to my Indianness or my Britishness. So yeah. And we just thought it would be good to have people from different perspectives and from different races. Like, we might not agree on certain things, and we're going to try not to go to war. But I just think it's really, really useful to have those conversations cross race and cross perspective to see what it is we can learn. And I'm going to start with the first question before we talk about race. I just want to read out these names. I'm not going to read out all of them. I'm going to read out these names, and I'm just going to start by asking you how it makes you feel. So this is about unarmed people killed by the police. So Trayvon Martin, walking home with an iced tea and Skittles, was shot by George Zimmerman. He was found not guilty. Keith Scott was sitting in his car reading, shot by a police officer who was not charged. Antania Jefferson, looking out of her window, was shot dead by a police officer who is still under an indictment for the murder. Stephen Clark was holding a cell phone, was shot 8 times in the back. Officers were not charged. And I could go on, but I'm not going to. So Jeff, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, that sort of thing, it just boils the blood within you, isn't it? When you hear that sort of thing, when people get killed, murdered, obviously, and there is absolutely nothing being done, that makes your blood boil, and something within you wants to become a Hulk and rip people apart when that sort of thing happens. Yeah.
Jeff, I mean, is it made worse because the shootings are by the so-called good guys, and the people are unarmed?
Well, yeah, that's a bad thing, isn't it? That's really bad. If people are unarmed, and these people who are shooting them are supposed to be law enforcers and so on, that makes it really, really, really bad.
Yeah. Jonny Lee, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, one of the first things that I've heard recently is people saying this is a US problem, but it isn't a US problem at all. What I've experienced living in 2 big major cities within the UK over the last 25, 30 years, I've had some black young people that I know who have been arrested, and it's been a case of mistaken identity. So they've been driving along a road and next minute they're in a police cell. And actually that's never happened to any of the white teenagers that I've been looking after or, overseeing. So to actually call this out and say, well, it's just police brutality in the US is completely to miss the mark, and I think that just shows the level of whiteness and white privilege in our society that wants to reduce this as somebody else's problem and somebody else's issue. And so actually, I think when you're white, you don't see yourself as a person of color at all. You just assume that race doesn't come into play at all. And I think that's one of the issues. And I think that's how that makes me feel is, particularly being a Christian and leading a church, we should speak up for those who in some ways have suffered injustice and haven't got the voice, and we should see how this affects us personally, and that's how that makes me feel.
So before I move on and ask the same question to Giuseppe, okay, why don't you tell us some of the incidents? I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s in Scotland. I remember being told by my parents, my dad was on the wrong side of the law anyway. I remember he used to carry a screwdriver and a hammer in the car. He was in prison multiple times and all that sort of stuff. But I also remember told not to wear too much jewelry. I was told not to dress in a way which would draw attention to myself, etc., because, and I remember when I was in Scotland, there was a number of stabbings. Scotland had become the stabbing capital of Western Europe when I was growing up. And some of you guys, I know there's someone from Kilmarnock watching, some of you guys will know about how bad Kilmarnock descended into violence and mindless kind of fights and stabbings and all that sort of stuff. But I remember they brought in something called Operation Spotlight, which was random stop and search. And I remember being searched like 4 times on the way to town and back from town. And I only lived 20 minutes away. And I'm like, what on earth? And I remember being followed around Woolworths and all sorts of stuff, purely because of the color of my skin. So Jonny, that's some of the incidents in my life. I could tell you a lot more and a lot worse, but Jonny, tell us about some of the incidents that you are referring to?
Well, most of those incidents that I would refer to are second-hand to me, but they're first-hand to somebody else. And I think that's what's really important. But, I should not give those things a second thought. Louise and I, when we took on our position in central Birmingham, probably in the year 2000, we chose to move into a district called Handsworth. And we lived there for over a decade. And just the difference of living in one particular area, that actually this is not just about social issues. Race actually forms a lot of the social issues that are out there. And young people who were Black or Asian, they were treated incredibly different to what I'd experienced growing up. So the unfairness, again, the stop and search. I mean, that's just a reality in a city like Birmingham, that if you're Black, you're going to have the chances are that you're more likely to be stopped and searched than a white teenager. And I've heard countless stories of just that, happening. And that just makes people obviously be afraid for themselves and be wary. And again, not everybody is on a level playing field. So I've seen it on football fields, in institutions, in positions, in church. Let's face it, the church has got a lot of work to do as well. And actually, there's just dozens of incidents really. And first and foremost, it makes me question myself. And I think that's, really important, first and foremost, that I don't just start throwing out platitudes and attitudes on everybody else, but actually I use part of this to question my own heart and motives.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I remember growing up, my parents were very, very, although my dad loved football, he was like, look, you need to stay away from football grounds because of that link with racism and football fans. I know that's come a long way, and particularly within Scotland, it was more sectarianism. So the team I supported, Glasgow Celtic, were very anti-English, and that's why I no longer follow football. Actually, when I became a Christian, I just kind of gave it up. And I remember learning about Bobby Sands and the hunger strikes and the Black and Tans and songs celebrating things like the Birmingham pub bombings and all that sort of stuff. And obviously, when I became a Christian, I was like, I can't keep this up. So that's really good. And we want to talk about the whole white privilege thing as well, because that's going to bring up some issues. But Giuseppe, so we just ran out a bunch of names. There was so many more. I mean, I didn't want to just keep reading them. I think it is good to reflect but what did that make you feel? And do you want to talk about some of your own experiences kind of with race, and how does being mixed race, how does that add or does it to the whole conversation?
Yeah. Firstly, like Jeff and Jonny have both said, it's frustrating, it's upsetting, makes you angry. I know me personally, all of last week, I was just, every day I'd wake up and just have this sense of just pain in my heart for what happened, particularly to George. But, this is consistently happening over the years, and nothing seems to be getting done about it. In any other area of life, if someone was to be murdered, they'd be going to jail, like simple as. You just wouldn't even question it. So why is this not applicable to police in America? It's very. I actually put a rap out about this with George Floyd. For me, it was just getting my feelings out, getting that hurt and frustration in the way that I know best, in the hope that it'll hopefully make people see, where Black people are coming from, where people of color are coming from. And it seemed to really resonate with people. It makes you just want to stand up and speak out about it. And I felt like I had to say something about it. You can't keep quiet in these kind of situations. And I think as well with all the names that you mentioned and others that you didn't mention but have still been the victims of police brutality in America and in the UK, you almost become desensitized to it in a way. You know, it's just another person that's been killed, and this is so normalized now that you almost don't feel anything for it. But I think with the incident happened last week, you know, it's a 4K video. It's almost like you lived it with him if you've watched the whole video. And I think for me, and probably for so many other people, that's really hit the nail on the head. It really struck a chord with people. And, you know, that I feel that now this is why there's so much outrage and demands for justice about this. You were going to say something, Steve?
Yeah, I didn't read all of the names. Listen to this one. Armando Dewalo. Now, I've probably pronounced that wrong, so I do apologize. Whilst taking out their wallet, was shot 41 times by 4 officers. What on
And this is the thing as well. It's just like
41 times.
The level of police brutality as well for such little things, it just doesn't correlate. It doesn't make sense. Even if people were legitimately committing crime, you know, what justifies that kind of force? You know, what justifies that action as a person who's meant to serve and protect the citizens of the nation? How are people meant to actually trust police if that is the way that they're handling things over there?
So some people would push back. Some people would push back and say, look, that is so not our problem. You're talking about America. You're talking about police brutality, you know, and you know, and they would say, actually, some people would say, and people have had this conversation with me, and I am someone who used to be really, really big into hip hop. This was a long time ago, and probably some of the artists I listen to, most of you haven't heard of, but, you know, they would say, well, actually, they're part of the problem, you know, glamorizing violence and very, you know, so what do you say about the people who say, hey, look, this isn't our fight. This is about America. This is about police brutality, and musicians who do have an obligation to lift up people, but their people particularly are actually part of the problem. What do you say, Giuseppe?
It's a fine balance, I think. And I think, you know, as a rapper myself, and for a lot of other rappers, other musicians, you know, they're speaking their reality. A lot of the people, they live in these kind of situations. They're from an impoverished area where there is violence, there is drugs, there is crime going off, there is killings happening on a daily basis, and probably so many that don't even get reported. They don't even get filmed. How can you rap about something that you don't know? How can you rap about something that's not reality for you? Do you know what I mean? And it just so happens that rap is an art form that you can express your reality. So I mean, it is a fine balance. You know, no one is trying to glamorize violence. I don't think anyone would wish that on anyone. But how you can only rap about what you live, and try and make that positive change. In terms of it being just a US problem and just a black problem, if you're a consumer of black culture, care about black people just as much as you care about black culture. You know, you listen to the music, you wear the brands, you know, you're so involved in the culture and you love the culture, care just as much about black people as you do about the black culture, is what I'd say.
That's really, really good. Jeff, do you want to talk about your experience of the apartheid and you know, and how that helps us kind of understand the situation where there seems, and again, there will be differences of political view and differences of personal opinion, but where it seems at least that the president himself, the government themselves, and the police seem to be acting in a way which is unjust to a certain segment of their community purely because of the color of their skin. Now, you might not agree with that, so if you don't, please push back. So do you agree or disagree? And if so, like, how does the apartheid, how does that help us think about this situation?
I think the way it can help us think about the situation is how we organize things and how we move things forward. You can learn a lot from the apartheid era about that. What happens now? So the organizers, what do they do now? The churches, what do they do now? The Christians, what do they do now? The world, what do they do now? So that can help. I mean, if I was to tell my life story, it would be to take a long time. But if you can think about being in school, 14, 15 years old, and all of a sudden, big white police guys come onto the school and starts beating up people for no reason, in classrooms, so that you don't even can't even go back to school, and this goes on for months and months and years and years. I used to be what we called awareness programs. We had awareness programs on schools, so schools were made aware, and the students made other students aware, and the school principal or head teacher allowed it, so that there was organized time for awareness programs. And I used to be one of the leaders at school, and on one day the police came and looked for me, and I had to be surrounded by all the teachers so they couldn't see me. But I was standing on the playground, and they shot about 100 tear gas canisters into our schools, because they were coming onto the schools. So if they shoot the tear gas canisters, they know you can't get away, and they're going to beat you up. So that was the sort of thing that was going on all the time. But moving on from that, you learn to.
Jeff, just hold there as well. So how old were you? And also, do you want to tell us about
14,
what
15.
happened? About 14, 15?
Yeah.
And what happened at Sharpsville? Because
that's a bit. It was a protest. Sharpsville was a protest, and where if you take America, it was a protest, and things went wrong because people's blood starts boiling and people start getting excited. You can protest and you can be passionate, but without being really angry or anything. You're passionate. You can be passionate, but you can still control it. And so people became too passionate for the police, and then instead of shooting people with rubber bullets, they were shot with live ammunition. So if you can think about this, people have rifles. The police have rifles. There's school children protesting, and they open fire with live ammunition. This is what happened at Sharpsville.
Yeah. So Jeff, I mean, like, one of the things that sometimes gets pushed back is, I know, guys, I've got an idea that we are going to overshoot on time. So if you guys need to drop out at any point, just let me know. Give me a 5-minute warning, and I will let you go. But I think this is really, really important. And we've got people saying that it's good to be having this conversation. Some people are going to say, look, at the end of the day, these protests, they're getting hijacked by a militant wing. They're turning violent. They're looting. They're rioting. They're burning down their own communities. Because of that, they are alienating other communities, not just the white community, but the American Asian community. The American Arab community. Like protesters. Like what should. And I know it's very, very easy to say. And again, you guys can come back because you might not all agree. What should be done to overturn this unjust system? Do we sit and wait it out? Do we take to the streets? What do we do?
Well, the organizers, if you talk about organizers, not just people who organize the rallies or the marches or the protests and so on. Like I said, for us, it was at schools. We had protests at schools. Churches marched and protested peacefully. This was all organized. There was an organization called the Ecumenical Action Movement that was formed specifically to allow churches to form together, whether it was Catholic. This thing needs a coordinated effort. Doesn't matter what your background is, denomination is. It's a coordinated effort, this sort of thing. So it was on school level. And let's face it, Steve, on school level, there's a lot of prejudice going on at school level. So there needs to be an awareness on school level. So it was school level, it was church level, but it was also on a local and national level. So there was just so much pressure put on government that this thing must stop, and it must stop now. It's not going to go on anymore. So for the organizers who started that, you can't stop now. This can't be the last now of it and then say, well, let's just see what happens in the future. No, you need to continue now. You need to continue until this thing gets head on and gets stopped. But there needs to be different organizations, different people organizing that. So in Lancaster or wherever you are, what are we going to do about it? Are we just going to not do anything? Well, let's march. Let's form a coalition together. Let's start protesting locally in our own areas and put pressure on our politicians to do something about this as well. What did the world do with South Africa? They put sanction on the whole of South Africa, you know, because they were disgusted with it. So there needs to be so much pressure from all levels.
That is really good. We've got a question here about the Toxfifth riots. So Jonny, I'm going to bring you in here, and I'm not sure if you know much about the Toxfifth riots. I'm sure they would have happened roundabouts the time. It was the 80s, wasn't it? But Toxfifth was a black community within Liverpool. The unemployment level of Liverpool was high, but the unemployment level amongst young black men in Toxfifth was outrageous. I can't remember what it was, maybe 60% or 70%. There was issues with militant policing. There was also a pushback from the locals against this militant policing. I think a car was stolen and the police followed the car into Toxfifth and the police officer was killed. And it was just a powder keg and it exploded. But Jonny, I mean, I've got a couple of questions. I mean, there's the whole Toxfifth thing, but also, you know, some people will be asking, okay, isn't this more an issue of class rather than race? You know, at the end of the day, isn't white prejudice just another name that we give for white guilt and white shame? And what about, you know, the young girls in Rochdale? Nobody's marching for them. Nobody's protesting for them. Why are we saying Black Lives Matter? Don't all lives matter? So that's a statement and a question and a comment all rolled into one. So I don't know how you're going to untangle that. But Jonny, over to you.
Well, you know, again, I would not see myself as an expert. I would see myself as somebody who has to listen. And, you know, and by the way, to all those people who are white out there like me, I don't think we've understood how whiteness has infiltrated the fabric of our society so deeply. And I think we need to acknowledge that and understand the levels of privilege that you are afforded because of being white. I'd say a couple of things. You know, anywhere where there is injustice, somebody should be standing up with a Christian voice, right? We all agree with that. But let's take an advert on the TV that would say, we're here to eradicate cancer. You don't suddenly get up and start saying, well, wait a minute, what about all the other diseases out there? You know, actually, that would deconstruct the power of actually dealing with something. So I don't think it is a good argument to say, because this is happening, we should think about all the other things. I don't think that's the right argument. So I think we should be speaking up against grooming gangs, and I think we should be speaking up against, hey, look, the COVID-19 report, why are Black and Asian people twice as likely to die from COVID-19? Why has that report not come out yet? Somebody should be speaking into all of these issues. But I would say this to myself and then all other white people out there, we've got to stop self-justifying. You know, one thing I hear from a lot of white people is, well, I've got black friends. You know, just because you've got black friends doesn't mean that the issue has just gone away. That's just self-justification. William Wilberforce was not just non-racist, he was anti-racist, he was an abolitionist, and every white person needs to move from being non-racist to anti-racist, and what we could do to actually change some situations. So I think for Steve, Jeff, Giuseppe, it is not your responsibility to educate me. It's my responsibility to educate me, as a person who's lived with white privilege and in a white society. So, hey, I'm not an expert on all of these different things, but I think it is demeaning to one thing just for us to blank it out and say, well, all lives matter. We all know all lives matter. We all know we are from one human race. Those things aren't up for discussion. We know that that's the truth, but we can't use it as a line not to engage with people's reality. Giuseppe talked about people's reality. And we must put ourselves in other people's shoes to understand their reality. And I think that's what we need to think about most.
Yeah, big shout out to Farhad, who's also from Handsworth, who was in Handsworth. He's from an Iranian background. I'm going to deal with your question later, but that's a really, really good question. Some really, really good questions and points coming out. I want to deal with this question here, Andrew Gardner's question. And Giuseppe, I want you to take this question. How do predominantly white churches start without being patronizing, appropriating, or just plain ignorant? And are they meant to do anything? So, Giuseppe, I mean, I know predominantly, you know, we brought you in here talking about mixed race, talking about youth and school, and talking about music, but tell us what are the churches supposed to do? Because there are voices within the Black community which would be very anti-church and saying the church is part of the problem. You know, we've got a white theology with a white Jesus. Do you know what I mean? And we perpetuate this problem. And there would be others saying, no, the church, particularly the Black church. And when I was in Birmingham, I spoke within Black church networks as well as various different other networks. And I remember talking to one of the guys who invited me to speak at a men's group, and I was saying, look, or a men's convention, I was saying, look, what are some of the issues you guys face? And he goes, oh yeah, gun crime, acid attacks. That's where a girl rejects you or cheats on you, so you chuck acid in her face. Or some guy, he's too white or he's too black. You know, he's black, but he's too of a light complexion, and he thinks he's a bit of a pretty boy, so you chuck acid in his face. Telling me about the percentages of single mothers, et cetera, and I was like, wow, like in a predominantly white congregation or a mixed congregation like my own, that's not the issues that we're facing on a day-to-day basis. I don't need to talk about that much, but what do you think, Giuseppe? What does the predominantly white churches, what do they need to be doing without being patronizing or just ignoring?
Well, I'd ask the question, what do they preach? You know, what do we sit down and listen to on a Sunday? What, you know, as Christians, we're taught love thy neighbor, love thy enemy. Even, you know, they talk about God being the good shepherd and looking after the sheep that's at risk of harm, who's in danger, and leaving the flock who are safe. If that's what we're preaching, if that's what we're telling our congregations on a Sunday and through our house groups, or, you know, just individually looking in your Bible and seeing those exact words, does that just include white people? Of course not. It's, you know, I'm part of a church who predominantly white members who go to this church. There are Black people who go to this church. Me and my family go to this church, and we're Black. Other people in there are from different ethnicities and stuff. We are surely included in that message. If we're valued members of that church, surely it is church's responsibility to also take a stand for this. You've seen different brands, you know, you had Nickelodeon pause the TV for 8.5 minutes or whatever it was, you know, to put that message out. You've had different brands speak up about without Black people, our products wouldn't even exist. You know, Black people and people of ethnicities are just from they're from the same places as white people who all come to this church. So surely that message has got to be inclusive for everyone. So I'd just say practice what you preach. Pretty much. It doesn't get as any more simple than that, really.
Yeah. Melissa's raised the point that there is a protest in Lancaster. So if to find out more about that, you can Google that. We will try and get the details. I'm not sure yet about on our webpage. I'm still asking myself, with the whole COVID thing, is doing a social protest at this time helpful or harmful? I don't know. I'm still asking myself those questions, but you know, you can definitely go to Google. I just want to say a couple of things as well, and then I want to go back to you, Giuseppe. I mean, I do think sometimes I've got friends who lead black churches, and one of the things that they would push back on is that sometimes what we do is we embrace the faith of the oppressor and not the oppressed. And they encouraged me to read, you know, I've got the African Bible commentary, absolutely fantastic. South Asian Bible commentary. You know, I've looked at, I've done a course in black preaching. I've looked into black theology, and very much, you know, what we try to do here is about empowerment. I remember we don't do this, but I remember going to a Godwara once, which is a Sikh temple. And I was in the military at the time, and I was part of this kind of public relations thing, you know. And I remember this Godwara offered free maths and English tuition to kids, and they offered discounted driving lessons. And I remember talking to the youth leader, a guy called Gurdip, and he was saying that that was nothing. In the 70s and 80s, they were offering interest-free loans so people could buy houses and set up businesses, and they wanted to see the Indian community thrive. And I was like, wow, I've never seen a church offer discounted driving lessons. I've never seen a church put on free maths and English tuition. Why are we not doing this? Like, why are we not talking about the fact that the Ethiopian eunuch in the book of Acts was a black guy? Do you know what I mean? Was a black guy, and he was probably sent home because he wasn't allowed to go to the temple because he was a eunuch. Why are we not talking about that? Why are we not talking about, you know, the Queen of Sheba? Why are we not talking about the fact that Jesus Christ had olive skin? Do you get what I'm saying? You know, yeah. So I mean, I've just gone on a little bit of a rant there, but you know, some people would push back and say, look, all we're concerned about is moralism and about, you know, God's blessing in the hereafter, and we are scared to take a position in the here and the now. Do you see that within the church sometimes? And if so, why and how do we address it? Did any of you want to answer that question? I mean, that was going to you, Giuseppe. But
sorry, the stream just cut out. I didn't hear what you said. Sorry.
Did it?
Just repeat the last question.
Jeff, did you hear me? Jeff, did you hear me? Because I will come back to you.
Yeah. The thing is, as long as there are people on this earth, racism will probably exist. Why? Because the human heart is wicked, extremely wicked. So don't get me wrong. This sort of thing, white on black racism, is very real. And needs to be addressed. But the human heart is the big problem. We can address that only through preaching the gospel. And I'm sorry that sounds very spiritual to people or so on, but I was once someone who hated white people.
Jeff, can
I hate white people? You can understand why.
Jeff, can I say, wow, and I'm married to a white woman, and I've never really said this to my congregation. I too hated. It wasn't so much all white people, but it was the English. Like growing up in a Catholic community, hearing about the hunger strikes, and also as an Indian and all of the whole imperialistic history and all that sort of stuff. Like I grew up hating, and it was the gospel that transformed me. So back over to you, Jeff. I just want you to point this out, that this isn't just within the black community, you know, Asians as well. But yeah, Jeff.
So that's exactly my point. You know, it is the gospel that transforms. And similar to you, like you, Steve, I'm married to a white person. Who would have thought that? You know, if you have seen me when I was a young person at schools and leading demonstrations, leading rallies, and all of this, you know, who'd have thought that? But it's the gospel that changes people. You and I cannot change the human heart. We can't do anything to change the human heart. Now, we can do all we can do to put pressure. That's the big thing, is to put pressure on people who makes decisions and who leads us. But we can't change the human heart. And the preaching in churches, preaching is so important. What we preach is so important, and what we teach and how we teach it. Do you guys do a conference as well? Is there a slot in the conference for racism and how we address racism within the context and so on? If you're a white church, have you ever invited a non-white person to come and preach and see how people respond to that sort of thing? They don't like the dialect, they can't understand the person, and they will start, all sorts of remarks will come out. If you really want to feel where you are, and then that's the sort of thing that you do. And you can either respond by saying, we don't have a problem, I've never been a racist. That's the denial thing. Oh, no, I'm not a racist. I like Jonny said, I've got a non-white friend, and people either deny or people are completely ignorant. They don't even know that they are racist. They don't even know that the remarks that they are making are offensive. So you need to have invite people into your church that you trust, obviously, people who are preachers that you trust or that you have been recommended to you, and start seeing how that will influence the church.
Yeah, Rob's mentioned the microphones. I've actually got a Rode, but I'm not sure what model it is because I'm useless at this sort of stuff. But yeah, that's really good, really useful. Yeah, I do think we need to create space for each other. We need to be listening to each other. I think the church need to be dealing with issues that are actual issues. Again, when I served in Iraq, we went to Iraq and we were looking for weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. And I really lost my faith because I remember going to chapel and it was really vague things about like loving your neighbor. And I'm like, well, what about my neighbor who's got legs and arms missing because we have invaded their country looking for something that doesn't even exist, right? Or justification by grace through faith. And I believe that we are saved by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. I believe it. I would give my life for it. But like nobody accepted the fact that we were making a bad situation even worse, that we'd left a power vacuum and actually created space for groups like ISIS. And I really struggled with my faith while serving in Iraq, because I'm like, do you know what? This is just a load of rubbish. It is just so rubbish. It is not addressing what is happening in the here and the now. And by God's grace, I came back. But one thing that has been really, really important to me is to make things concrete. I'm going to talk about single mothers. I'm going to talk about the fact that Timothy in the Bible was mixed race. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the fact that David, his ancestors were mixed race. Ruth was a Moabitess. I'm going to talk about the fact that in the new creation, people from every language, nation, tribe, and tongue are going to be there. So there's nothing wrong with language and there's nothing wrong with nationhood because God sees it in heaven. I'm going to talk about that stuff. And if people don't want to listen, hey, that's okay. I will talk somewhere else. I will find a platform to talk about this stuff. So guys, I've used up loads of time. Wow. And there is so much stuff here, which I'm going to deal with. So, but I'm going to go to some closing statements instead. Thank you guys all for your engagement. This is probably a conversation that it would be best to have again because there is so much. But I want you guys to give some closing statements. So here's what I want. Giuseppe, if Donald Trump is watching, and I'm not sure that Donald Trump is a hope star, he probably isn't. If Donald Trump is watching, what would you say to him? Jeff Haskins, if those who are part of the Black Lives Matters movement or community organizers in the UK or the US or anywhere in the world are watching, what would you say to them? And Jonny Lee, if there are people in leadership positions, political or church or community or ministry, 2 minutes, closing statement, what would you like to say to them? So can I ask, guys, who wants to go first?
I will.
John, Giuseppe, I'm gonna put you on your own.
Yeah. In regards to Trump, if he was to watch this conversation, there was a picture of him holding up a Bible in front of the church. I'd ask him, have you actually opened the Bible? Have you read what God thinks about the situation? Because as far as I'm aware, nowhere in there does it justify the violent oppression of people who are suffering. God is love, God is the truth. Are you encouraging that? Are you trying to spread that as a leader of your nation, who is a role model, who, you know, sets the standard for people who are followers of him and supporters of him? Are you, what message are you trying to convey? Is what you're saying making this situation better, or are you just adding fuel to the fire? Yeah, that's what I'd be asking Trump if he was to watch this.
Yeah, no, that's really good and really respectful. And I think we have to be able to speak across political and religious and racial lines without all of the hate. Jeff Haskins, do you want to go next, buddy?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So speaking, if I was to speak to the press or organizers of the protest, the first thing I would say, the timing. Stick to the social distancing rules if you're going to organize protests and so on. We don't want more people dying because of the coronavirus while we are protesting. But we don't stop here. That's a big thing. If we are going to protest, then it needs to be ongoing. It needs to be long term. It needs to be local. It needs to be countywide or statewide, or in our situation, countywide. It needs to be national. And it needs to be global. Some issues need a global voice, and we need to have people from all over the world standing together. There are many issues that are being addressed globally, and these things become successful. But we need to not now stop with the pressure, because these sort of things happen all the time, and they've happened years ago, and nothing gets done. So if this is the right thing to do, then it needs to be taken through to the end, and we need to keep on going until this issue is resolved.
Yeah, that's really good. Jonny Lee, church leaders or leaders in ministry or business or yeah, what would you like to say as a closing statement for them?
Well, again, as a white church leader, we should constantly look at how whiteness and white privilege has actually been the dominant culture of our churches. I thought what you said there about the way that people read the Bible and what has been portrayed about Jesus, about the stories of the Bible through a white cultural lens. I think we need to readdress that. But I think the most important thing is to listen to stories, to get out there and educate yourself. There's some great resources out there we should be reading. And if we have a weak history in this area, I think we should repent before God and also do what we can to change, not just immediately jump into the situation right now. So get some good resources. There's some great books. There's some great podcasts. There's some great people to follow on social media. And I think we should do the work now to listen and to educate. And the final thing I think is about prayer. We should pray as if this was a member of our own family, because actually it is our family that is hurting. And when one part of the body of Christ hurts, we all hurt, and we should pray in that way too.
Yeah, I just want to close by giving a statement to those who are watching from white communities. I think, honestly, white guilt and white shame, it doesn't help anybody. This is a fight not just for Black lives. This is a fight for humanity in general, and it's a fight against prejudice, however that may manifest. And I want to say, it's great that we are able and should come together. And what we need to be recognizing is sometimes the churches use the Bible as a weapon of mass destruction. That's not the way it was intended. And I really do believe that one day the knowledge of the Lord shall cover the earth like the waters cover the sea. But until that day, we need to pray. We need to organize. We need to walk with dignity. We need to not be caught up by consumerism and materialism. We need to give a monkeys about our streets and the poor people and the broken people on our streets, whether they are being human trafficked by grooming gangs or whether they are being stopped over by the police purely because of the color of their skin. So, guys, I'm going to bring everybody back. We're going to say goodbye, and we so love you. And we just hope you have a fantastic day. God bless you guys. Take care.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.